And now for our final Grimm's fairy tale of the week, we have the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, there lived a girl who was called Red Riding Hood because of the bright red cloak that she always wore. One day, her mother said, "Red Riding Hood, your grandmother has not been feeling well. Take this basket of food to her, and remember, the woods can be a dangerous place. Do not speak to strangers." Red Riding Hood promised and set off for her grandmother's house. She had not gone far when a voice behind her said, "What brings such a bright girl to the woods today all alone?" Red Riding Hood turned around, and there was a wolf. Because she had never met a wolf before, Red Riding Hood was not afraid. "I am taking a basket to my grandmother," she said. "She hasn't been feeling well. We have such a good time when I visit. I'm hoping to make her feel better." The wolf nodded. "And grandmother's house, where is that?" he asked. "Well, it's only a little way ahead," she said, pointing, "up around the bend and through the meadow." Too late, Red Riding Hood remembered her mother's warning. "Goodbye," she said. "Goodbye," said the wolf. When Red Riding Hood was out of sight, he ran through the woods to his grandmother's house. He knocked on the door, and a voice inside called, "Is that you, Red Riding Hood? Come in, my dear, the latchstring's out." The wolf quickly entered and rushed to the grandmother's bed. He snatched her up and pushed her in the closet. Then he put on her robe and her kerchief and jumped into the bed. Just then, Red Riding Hood arrived at the cottage. She knocked on the door and called, "Grandmother, it's me, Red Riding Hood. Come in, my dear. The latchstring's out," the wolf said in his best grandmother voice. Red Riding Hood pulled the latchstring and entered the dark room. "Why, grandmother," she said, "you don't look well at all. What big eyes you have. Let me get you a warm, wet cloth." "All the better to see you with, my dear," said the wolf, as she put the warm cloth over his eyes. Oh, grandmother, what big ears you have!" Red Riding Hood exclaimed. "They must be swollen with fever." She put her small hands on the wolf's ears. "All the better to hear your sweet voice," he replied. "Dear grandmother," Red Riding Hood said, "what big teeth you have! I believe you have been alone in your cottage for too long with nothing good to eat." "All the better to eat you with," said the wolf. He licked his lips as Red Riding Hood turned to open her basket. At that moment, grandmother, who had finally recovered her senses, pushed open the closet door. "Grandmother!" Red Riding Hood exclaimed. She ran to her grandmother and hugged her. Grandmother held her close and said, "Leave us alone, wolf." The wolf looked at the old woman and the young girl as they held each other tight. He thought about the warm, wet cloth that Red Riding Hood placed on his eyes, and how kind she had been when she thought he was the grandmother. Suddenly, the wolf didn't feel hungry anymore. He felt bad for what he had done. The wolf ran from the house in shame and never threatened another human again. The end. Okay? All right. I hope you've enjoyed our week of Grimm's Fairy Tales. Next week, get ready for Johnny Appleseed. See you then.